This episode of Brains on Games will talk about Monster Pit, a game that combines engine building, worker placement, and die-rolling monster battles. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we're going to talk about a game that was sent to me recently by the folks over at Elzra Games. Now, this is a Canadian game company that made one of my favorite dungeon crawling games, the funniest dungeon crawler I've ever played, which is Catacombs, which is a dungeon crawling game where you fight monsters by flicking your arrows across the board. So it's a dexterity game. This is a game that's set in the same universe called Monster Pit. This is a huge box, but Monster Pit is a game that should be widely available soon. They sent me a copy and it was on Kickstarter a while back. So I will put more information about Monster Pit in the show notes below this video. But Monster Pit is a game for between 1 and 5 players. There are solo rules, there are co-op rules, and there are one versus many rules. It's a game for kids age 14 and up. It's not too rules heavy, but there's a lot of things you can do in the game. So definitely a bit complex for the younger kids. And it's a game that plays in 60 to 90 minutes. I think at higher play counts, probably an hour to 2 hours. Let's take a deeper look at Monster Pit by Elzra Games. There is a lot going on in Monster Pit. It's got a huge board. It did take up our entire 6x4 gaming space for a 3-player game. So we really had to move things around to make sure we had enough room for everyone and for all of the stuff that you need to play this game. But it's medium in terms of its complexity overall. The rules are simple, but like I said earlier, there's a lot of things that you can do. What you're trying to do in this game is, if you're playing as the captains, as the heroes, as the good guys, you're working together to defeat the monster, and captains win by defeating the monster. The monster wins, and the monster could be controlled by cards and dice, or could be controlled by another player in a one versus many style. So you're either playing fully cooperative, or one versus many, or solo, like I said. And the monster's going to win if they make it all the way to the end of the board. They've got a track, a vengeance track that goes around the city, and they start over here at the top. And if they make it all the way to this space, they're going to win the game. The monster could win by knocking all of the players out as well. There are tons of monsters to choose from in this game. They've all got their own little tokens. The artwork is easily recognizable as being a game that takes place in the Catacombs universe, and I do really like that art style, and it does remind me of the fun that I had playing Catacombs with my kids when that game first came out. But you've got lots of choices of monsters. Each monster has a varying level of difficulty, so you can alter how hard it is to play that monster. You might be battling against a dragon, or there's a vampire queen in here, which is one of my favorites. They all behave very differently, and their abilities are listed on the side of their card. They might have some special power that might take place and affect the heroes at some part of the game. And so there's some replayability, and like I said, it's very customizable in terms of its level of difficulty. All of the players and the monster too is going to have a little wooden disc with the sticker on it, which should be very familiar to Catacombs players. So here's the Vampire Queen. I don't know if you'll be able to see her very well, but she'll start the game at the very beginning of that vengeance track. And then each of the players is going to have their own character disc. Of course, if you're battling a monster, you're going to need some way of tracking how much health the monster has, how many hit points the monster has. This is going to vary. You use this big cube to track the monster health. The monster is going to have dice to roll as well. There are 3 different dice that are really important in this game. There are white dice and yellow and red. The white die will favor the heroes. You're going to have more hero faces on that die. The red die favors the monsters, and the yellow die is neutral. It's in between. It has an equal number of monster and captain faces on it. So you're traveling around the board, like I said. You're placing your captain on different parts of the board in order to buy equipment or hire soldiers that can attack or defend against the monster. But as you go through the game, the lead player is going to start the turn by rolling a pile of dice. So the morning phase starts with an income roll, where you look at all the dice that are on your board. And in this case, I'm going to have 9 dice. It's based on, okay, I've got one yellow and 1 white over here. I've got 2 white and a yellow because he's got a slingshot. I've got a white and a red and a yellow and a red. So you look at all the dice that are on the cards in your engine here, and then you get to roll up to 8. You'll get a gold for each of those captain's results. The monster's going to move forward on the track by 1 space for each of these monster results that you rolled. So it's quite an interesting, I think it's an interesting mechanism where you're building up your own engine to get more of these dice that's going to allow you to be more powerful, attack the monster, to earn more income because you get a gold for each of those captain's axes that you roll. But at the same time, the more of these dice you roll, the farther along the monster is going to travel as you roll more of those monster faces. So you'll find as the engines are building up, the monster is going to be moving faster and faster each turn. Once you've done your income roll and you've hopefully gathered a few coins, then you're going to be able to place your character somewhere on the board. So you can activate all the buildings on whatever area that you're going to. So if you go over here to visit the City Watch, you can recruit some soldiers. You can attack the monster from here. You could also maybe, as the game gets closer to the end, you might have to sacrifice one of the soldiers on your board in order to stop the monster, slow them down, prevent them from attacking the city, so that you can hopefully get an extra turn or two and knock them down a few pegs. If you come over to the Great Hall, you'll be able to buy mounts at the stables. You'll be able to get some quests. If you go over here to the Market District, you can hire characters at one of these taverns or all 3 of the taverns if you have enough money. We never found we had enough money in this game. You could buy some of these white crystals that allow you to re-roll your dice. If you move over to the Southern Gate, you can get a Wyvern, which gives you some one-time use special ability. You can go to the church, which will allow you to reduce the number of dice the monster gets to roll on their turn, so you're degrading the monster. If you pay some money at the church, you can go all the way down here to the tower at the Southern Gate and attack the monster from there, as long as nobody's going to attack it up here at the top. Over here at the Mystics' Quarters, you can visit the dwarves, and they're going to give you some extra money or potentially some gems. This is where you hire the wizards as well. I moved things around when the player board came out, but the Wizard's Tower is this one. And there's another deck. Like, there are decks of cards and decks of cards and decks of cards all around the board for this game. These are monster cards that if the monster gets a good roll, they're going to get some extra power as well. So there's tons of cards around the board, and it was a lot. Like I said, you need an experienced player to keep track of everything so that all the players can be organized and understand what's going on. In the center at the Royal Keep, you can accept a quest from the king, and you have to complete that quest on your next turn, or else one of your characters will be injured because the king is angry with you. You can also make a wish where you sort of spend a certain amount of gold in order to draw these wish tokens from a bag that might give you a re-roll or an extra captain's result or some token that you can use later on in the game. You could also, this is where you visit the armory in order to buy some upgrades to the die rolls that your heroes and soldiers can make. You might, I didn't even mention back here at the Mystics' Quarters, instead of earning some gold or gems from the dwarves, you may be able to access some healing as well. So there's a die roll that will allow you to heal some of your injured soldiers if they get hurt battling against that dragon. So there are a lot of things you can do, and there's separate decks of cards there's almost an overabundance of things that you can do in this game. But at the same time, it's one of the interesting things, I think, is that the resources are limited. So there's not an unlimited amount of these tokens. There's not an unlimited number of these cards. And the dragon in particular, when we were playing with the dragon, was burning cards and removing cards from the game at an incredibly fast pace, unfortunately for us. At some point, you're going to be attacking that monster. You're going to be at the Southern Gate, or you're going to be at the Citadel Gate, and you're going to attack the monster. You need to do that. You need to get this monster down to 0 hit points before it gets to the end of the board in order to win the game. And that's where you're going to start doing some die rolling, and hopefully you've maybe got some gems or some other ways. Some of your soldiers might have abilities that mitigate some of the randomness here. Your Vampire Queen is going to start with one of each of these dice. They can roll a maximum of 7. So we'll talk about how this monster can upgrade their dice as we go through the game. And your hero is going to roll dice based on the soldiers they have on the attacking side of their board. So you're just going to roll big handfuls of dice and compare how many monster faces come up on the monster's roll and how many hero faces come up on the captain's roll, and the winner takes all. The monster wins in the case of a tie. If the monster wins by too much, you're going to have characters that get removed from the game because the monster takes them. Some of these monsters have powers that protect them from being damaged. The battles do tend to be quite tense and interesting. So you'll be trying to zap that dragon, or in this case the vampire queen, and knock their hit points down to 0 before they get too far. It's a real race because you're spending your action on your turn to do that, and then the next player is going to roll that income phase, and the monster is going to move forward around the board. Finally, once all the players have acted, you're going to enter the twilight phase where the monster gets to do the monster roll. And then you roll all of the monster dice, like I showed you on that monster track, and the result of the number of monster heads is going to determine what that monster does. Sometimes there's an effect that randomly targets some area of the board, and there's a die that has these symbols on it that will allow you to figure out which area is being attacked. Sometimes they're going to damage the captain and injure the captain, injure all of the captains even. Sometimes they'll get die rolls that will allow them to increase the number of dice they roll next time. So the more monster faces that are earned on that roll, the more powerful the monster potentially could become, the more damage it's going to do to the city. There are ways to mitigate that roll too. There are some creatures. There was a wyvern that I could sacrifice in order to force the monster only to roll half of the normal dice that they would typically roll, and that did save our bacon in one of the games that we played. This is a game where there's a lot of strategy and planning, where you have to kind of organize your turn. You could do things simultaneously. There are not a lot of things that require you to plan out and decide who's going to act first, although there are only 2 spots for players on each of the locations on the board, so you might plan a little bit before you begin your turn. But you are planning ahead, and you're trying to use your actions efficiently to knock that monster's hit points down in order to win the game. And when you are planning ahead, when you are trying to do efficient turn taking, when you're budgeting actions and coins, then we are talking about, just like all of these strategy games, we're talking about executive functioning skills, those abilities that you need to work towards a goal. And this game has those abilities in spades. It's one where you really do have to plan and work together in order to defeat that monster. And that's the other skill that I think is great. I do like these cooperative games where everyone's working together and planning. And I think that cooperation, that social skill of sitting around the table and working together, you can share your equipment if 2 characters are in the same area of the city. If you're sharing and cooperating and dealing with potentially a player who kind of wants to take the alpha role and take over and tell everyone else what to do, like, those are good social skills, I think, for kids to learn. It's team building, and those are important skills to have and to practice. And this kind of gives a structure to that cooperation. So I do like those cooperative games, and this one has a theme that's fun as well. You're doing that fantasy battling against those monsters. Final thoughts about Monster Pit. Well, this is a game that is a lot like Pandemic, I think. It starts out, you're kind of figuring out what actions you're going to take, and the monster gets stronger and faster, and it's more and more tense as the game nears its conclusion, as the monster gets closer to the end. All of those die rolls are tense, including the income rolls, honestly, because you want to have as much income as possible. We never had enough money to buy all of the things that we wanted to buy. So it is a Pandemic style kind of a game, but it combines those great, I think, great fun mechanisms of worker placement, which I like, engine building, which I also like. Plus, it's in the Catacombs universe with that fun Catacombs geometric style art. I do like those wooden chips with the creatures on them. I just think the artwork for those Catacombs creatures is a lot of fun. So it's very recognizable as a Catacombs game, although it really is a totally different style from the other games by this company that I played. I love that you can ramp up the difficulty or adjust the difficulty level. There are events that can happen. I didn't even talk about the events deck. There are creatures that are going to be coming out on the board that you may have to battle with. We didn't really use those because that kind of lengthens and complicates the game. and I was playing with my son and his friend from school who's a chess player but hasn't really played other modern board games. So it was really interesting to kind of teach a new board gamer how to play a game like this, but we wanted to keep the playtime down so that we could get a few games in and test out the mechanisms of this game. So I like that you can adjust the difficulty and you can make it really hard, but it's already, even at the very basic level, it is already a hard game to win. You really do have to adjust your strategy for the different creatures that you're playing against, and that is something that lends to the replayability of the game. There's so many different monsters, and all of the heroes have different abilities as well. We didn't find in our first playthrough that we really used the heroes' abilities very often. One, because there were so many things to keep track of and figure out as we were playing through our first playthrough, but two, because we didn't do a very good job of choosing characters that worked well together, that where we planned ahead enough to be able to use those die rolls effectively. So it does help to have some experience with these kinds of games, and if you can have a couple of players who've played Monster Pit before teaching the new player, that's going to work quite well because you can keep everything organized and remind the players without having to reread this cheat sheet, this long double-sided cheat sheet over and over again to remember, what does that building do? What does that symbol mean? Are there downsides to Monster Pit, though? Well, I mean, this is a game. Like I said, its replayability is there because there's so many different characters. There's so many options for monsters, and there's so many options for actions. There's so many. It's like an abundance of choice, and sometimes we found ourselves feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the decks of cards, by all the different choices that you can make. I mean, you can take an action at every single building in the area that you're going to, but we rarely had enough money to do all of those actions. So we were limited by the amount of coins because we weren't rolling those captain's faces enough, and the monster was rolling ahead as fast as he possibly could. So there are a lot of options. I do think it's a game that's going to play better with 3 or 4 players than 1 or 2, because that gives you more things that you're doing each turn in order to interfere with the monster. I do also think it's going to play better once you've played a couple of games and have an idea of what all these buildings do and how they operate and how your actions are going to interact with the monster and slow it down as it's going forward. There's some randomness mitigation, but this is a game that's all about die rolling. You're rolling dice for income, and the dice did not always cooperate when we're rolling. You're rolling dice to attack the monster. You're rolling dice for the monster's attack. There's creatures that are going to come out. So I think that the randomness does level the playing field to an extent for experienced players versus newer players. It kind of keeps the new, less strategy-minded players in the game. But at the same time, for some of the folks who like those heavier strategy games, even with the randomness mitigation, you might feel like, well, there's a bit too much of that randomness. Or, we did have some games where it felt like the dice just were not cooperating and the rolls weren't allowing us to do the things that we wanted to be able to do. But it is a game that combines those great mechanisms of engine building and worker placement, which I love. It's a game that does have that theme and the great geometric style artwork. Like I said, look, this is a game I want to try again and really learn the ins and outs of because I don't feel like I did that in our quick playthroughs. I will put a link in the show notes where you can find more information about Monster Pit, but thanks so much to Elzra Games for sending this game my way. I loved the Catacombs games, so this was a fun change of pace in the Catacombs universe. But this was also a very quick overview. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any suggestions related to this video, other videos on Brains on Games, or about Monster Pit itself, you can leave them in the comments section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. Previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.